All right, the purpose of this demonstration is to review with you the basics around configuring and demonstrating webhooks in Odoo. First, let's start with the definition of what a webhook is, right? So a webhook allows one application, in this case, in our example today, we'll use Odoo, to send real-time data or event notifications to another application whenever a specific event occurs. For example, an event could be the confirmation of a sale order, or the creation of an opportunity, or the change of a specific stage on a project's task, etc. So let's go in and actually configure an Odoo environment to test this out. I'm going to start from scratch so that way you guys can follow me. We'll just do test test. And while this is loading, I am actually going to go into another application called Postman. So if you don't have an account for Postman, go to postman.co and set one up. Essentially, Postman is an environment, a website where you can test API integrations, webhooks, so on and so forth. So to do that, once you're logged in, you're actually going to want to go to your workspaces, and I'll create a new workspace from scratch. Right, you can configure a bunch of stuff. We're going to keep it really simple. You can follow these exact instructions as well to test it on your own. So in this case, I'll name this team test, and I'll create the workspace. Now, once the workspace is created, you want to go into the settings button here, and you want to turn on mock server. That will enable this little icon over here in the left, which you can then click it, and we'll create a mock server. And the mock server I create, we're going to build this around a post, and we'll have the request URL be webhook, and you can leave everything else the same. Click next and name this. We'll call this test server create. Okay, so that's set up and ready to roll. Now, I want to get into how we're going to make this all work. So let's go back to our Odoo environment. That should be ready as well. I'll turn on debug mode. And before I get into the workflow, let's actually go to our automation rules and create new. And I'll stop there and get back into this. So let's do a quick review. So Postman, I logged in, I created my workspace, I went to the settings and activated mock servers, I created my mock server, and then I didn't copy my URL yet because I'm gonna get to that in a second. Now, next step, we create the Odoo database. Once the Odoo database is created, we wanna go to automation rule, create, and now let's configure our automation rule as follows. So I'm gonna name this whatever, we'll call it test webhook. I wanna build it around the CRM. The opportunity specifically. So I want the trigger to be on save. Really, this is on save and on creation are very versatile. Just to narrow it down, I'm gonna actually set up my domain to say, I wanna check to see if the ID of the record is set or not. If it's not set, then trigger it, right? Because if an ID is not set, it implies the record hasn't been created, and we want this automation to run every time the record has been created. So that's how we will isolate records that haven't been created to trigger this. Now, add an action. For this, I want to send a webhook notification. The configuration of this is very simple. Let's jump back to Postman quick, and here you'll see we want to send requests to this mock server. To do that, we would capture this URL. You can also click copy URL up here. And this will be the URL that we use. So the way to think about this, and let's go back to our flow, right, is we have the Odoo database created. What's going to happen next is we're going to create the record, which is going to trigger the action. And when the action gets triggered, it's going to trigger the webhook. And essentially the webhook is just a package of data, right? It's in a format called JSON. And this is an example of what JSON format looks like. So let's go in here and set it up. And here's your sample payload, right? So here we can say what fields we want, right? We maybe want the company name. We want the expected revenue. We want the phone number. We want the email. maybe we want you can, pretty much leave it at this, but this is going to give you an example of the payload that's going to be sent outside of Odoo to this destination, right? And here are just your field names. You have your model, in this case is the crm.lead. The name is just a generic name that Odoo uses for webhook notifications. The email in this case is just it's a placeholder called Hello World. Expected revenue, the ID of the record we're creating. Here you have your partner name and then the phone number. And let's go ahead and save this and let's test it, right? So when I go to my CRM, I'll create a new opportunity. I'll call it ALEI, and I'll give it an email of ALEI@odoo.com, phone 123, expected revenue 321, and I add. Now, essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating, in this case, the opportunity, and when I refresh, here, you'll see at 2:55, the exact time is 2:55, I had a request come in, essentially, and it's a package. And what is the body of my package? Here it is. I can see it's the webhook notification coming from the CRM lead. It's ID 1. It's the first record I've created in this database, which makes sense. I just created the database. Here's the email address that is being received. Here's the expected revenue. Again, the ID, the partner name, and the phone number. So this is to be thought of as like a package, right? Imagine a box, right? And we're putting a bunch of stuff in the box. In this case, it's fields or data. And we're essentially saying to Odoo, whenever something happens, right, I want you to send the contents of this box to this destination. And in this case, the destination is Postman. And Postman's just letting me know, like, hey, dude, I got the package you sent me. Here are the contents of it. And that is the first step to creating any integration between two systems, right? Is getting the data into a format that is shippable and then actually defining when you want to ship it out and then going through the process of actually shipping it out. And you can validate that it is effectively shipped because of the fact that it is posted here in Postman. I can see that this system outside of Odoo successfully received the data, the specific fields, and in the format that I want it to. So that's a success. Now, let's take it a step further, right? So let's just review this quick. So we created the database, we triggered the action, which was based on a creation of an opportunity. The webhook triggered, it went into packaged the data, we defined our fields, and it sent it in JSON format. It sent it to the specific endpoint or the URL that I had from, in this case, the one from Postman, and I can confirm that that data was received, right? Now, let's take it a step further. Let's actually go through the process of sending this to another endpoint. And in this case, I'm going to forget this first step because we already have that set up. And I am going to, in this case, send it to an endpoint called nko-odoo.ngrok.app. And now I'm going to go slow to try to keep you guys with me here, but this is essentially something I have set up on my computer, right? It's a public endpoint, and it's actually, when something happens, it's going to forward the payload to my local computer, which in this case is just port 5039. Ports are to be thought of as like, right, I have an infinite number of doors in my warehouse, and I'm just saying, hey, world outside of my computer, whenever data flows to this place, nko-odoo.ngrok, send it through my computer specifically to door 5039 in my warehouse, because inside of that door, I have some custom code, and here is where I define it, right? Now, before I get into teaching us a little bit about that, I actually want to go back here and define this, and I'm going to call it webhook, and I'll explain to you in a second why. But I'm just saying send it, instead of sending it to Postman, now send it here, right? Because again, Postman doesn't have any logic or anything like that on its side. It's just letting me know, hey dude, I received what you sent me. Now, what I'm doing is I'm sending it now to a different destination, which is to be thought of as like my warehouse, specifically door 5039. And inside of that door, the data that gets sent is going to encounter this script, right? And I'm going to walk you through as quickly as I can the basics of it. So I'm going to start down here because it actually makes sense to go here first. So let's focus on this, right? So what's happening is this code is saying whenever you receive a package that has a / webhook at the end of it, and again, that is why I went here and defined / webhook here, right? I'm saying whenever you receive something to this door with this particular endpoint, then I want you to do this. And really it's saying I want you to retrieve the payload from the webhook, which very simple. It's looking at all of the fields, and it's saying like I also want you to validate that the model associated with the payload is equal to crm.lead. Now let's go back here quick, and you'll see model is crm.lead, right? So I also then it's going to then say essentially if there's an error, then kick back an error, but there's not going to be an error. Here it then says, so it's just, right, code just runs logically. It's going to run this. It's going to check this. It's going to check this. It's going to check for this. If this is true, it's going to bypass this. If right, it's model, in this case, it's actually not equal to crm.lead. If it's not equal to crm.lead, it's going to return this. But if it is equal to crm.lead, it's going to bypass this and it's going to go to this. And in this case, we're going to say create essentially the opportunity by leveraging what's called the create opportunity in Odoo function. And this is going to look at the payload. Now the create opportunity in Odoo function is defined up here. Here you can see it. And now what we're doing here is we're saying the user, we need to first and foremost make sure we have access to this Odoo environment. So I want to validate that we can authenticate Odoo, which is another function. So it's now going to look back up here and it's going to say, can we authenticate Odoo? How do I do that? Well, it's going to say, like, first just connect to the database. And once you're connected, I want you to take the Odoo database name. I want you to take the Odoo username. I want you to take this guy's password. And I want you to let me know if I can get into the system, right? If I cannot, if not, then raise the concern that the authentication failed. If I can get through the system, then bypass and actually just return the user ID. Perfect. Now that I've, and really, like, I've returned the user ID, and here it's going to say you have the user ID, go and authenticate Odoo. And once I've authenticated Odoo, I have it set up to just create a new partner, which I'm gonna not waste my time on that with you right now. It's very redundant because what I'm gonna tell you next is the same thing. The next thing I wanna do is I wanna prepare my fields for creating a new CRM lead. And in this case, I wanna define essentially all of the fields that I'm gonna use to create my new opportunity. Here I'm gonna say for the field called name, I want you to go into the payload and I want you to get the field called display name. So here it's going to, in this case, look, and it'll take or partner name. It's going to take the partner name and it's going to use that. Next, I want you to take the email from field and I want you from the payload. I want you to, I'm sorry, take the email, the use for the new opportunity, the female email from to define the email from field. Same thing with expected revenue, same thing with partner ID. This is very simple because all the fields are the same, but if you were using two different systems, it's very likely that the field in Shopify is going to be called something like customer email address. And in this case, I would want to say, when you're creating a record in Shopify called customer email address, go into the payload and get this field from the payload, which is the technical name of the email field inside of Odoo, which comes over with the payload, so on and so forth. So it's going to gather all of these fields, and it is essentially going to then create an action in Odoo. So we're going to do opportunity ID. We're going to again authenticate, and we're going to create the opportunity. We're going to use the opportunity fields defined here to create it. And if there is no opportunity ID in this case, then we're not going to do anything. It's going to say it failed. So that's how it's going to run, right? It's going to first grab everything from the payload, and it's going to then start to execute some of these actions like create the opportunity. And by creating the opportunity, it's going to require us to authenticate. Once we authenticate, it'll allow us to create the opportunity, and it will then at the end of all of this this is the meat of it, right? It's going to let us know that your API integration is complete. Okay, kind of long, but you get the idea. Let's test it, right? So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the opportunity. It's going to trigger the webhook. It's going to send to the endpoint. The endpoint is going to receive my data, and my warehouse, specifically door 5039, is listening for a package to arrive. And when that package arrives, my script is going to run. And my script is going to do everything I just told you it would do, which I just defined here for you. And it's ultimately going to then update our second environment, which in this case, the second environment is a database called destinationdatabase.odoo.com, which I actually have created right here. And now let's go ahead and test. So I'm going to go to my CRM. I'm going to create an opportunity called MCAR. Well, let's call, yeah, just actually create MCAR. I was testing earlier. And let's here do MCAR at odoo.com, 123321. And I'm going to click add. And now, just like that, it has been added. And when I go into my destination database and I refresh, there's MCAR opportunity with all of my fields correctly mapped. And here you can see this run. So this is the action that happened. It essentially on this date and time at 2:46, and you can see it's the time might be a little wonky. Don't worry. Essentially, it's saying like the payload has been received, and this is the payload, right? So it's the ID 13, the model is crm.lead, the display name is MCAR opportunity, the email is this weird email I put in, the expected revenue is 321, again, the ID of the opportunity, partner ID, the name, and then the phone number. And here it's saying, all right, Nick, I've created this new partner for you. The name is MCAR, the integration is complete, and here's the final ID of the opportunity that we created in your new database. And now it's then sending a post back saying like 200 means you're clear. Let me know if you want something else to happen. And that is the nuts and bolts of how all of this works. The code might be a little confusing. Don't worry about it for now. I can share the script with you. But again, just to reiterate, the way that integrations work is it's very simple, right? You're going to define an action, a webhook, when it gets triggered and where that package gets sent to. And that package is ultimately, once it gets triggered, it's going to get sent. It arrives at the endpoint. You have your custom modules sort of sitting in this warehouse in room, in my case, 5039. It could be any room. It's generic. It's listening, and it's essentially waiting for a package to arrive. And once the package arrives, you essentially tell it by way of code, you tell the system, like, I want you to rip this package apart. I want you to take the piece called name and store it here. I want you to take the piece called phone number, and I want you to, plug it into this field in this other software. I want you to take the email and use it here, the expected revenue and use it here, and I want you to then confirm that everything happened correctly. Boom. That is, in a nutshell, how an integration works. You can extrapolate on this and make it as complex as you want. You can, have tons of different things happen, across the system based on all sorts of different actions, trigger actions. You can define all sorts of different destinations, right? Instead of, 50, I could always send everything, for example, to 5039 as my port. But what I could do is I could say, instead of webhook, I could say webhook -2. And what I would do here is I would then say, you could copy this and you could say, when you receive something called webhook, do all this, but when you receive something called webhook 2, I want you to do something totally different. And let me start to tell you what I want you to do, um, essentially. So that should give you guys a good idea of like the basics. I encourage you to set up Postman, do a simple test to see if you can send the package outside of Odoo and get it to show up in Postman. And if you can do that, then you can do the rest, because doing the rest is just having some simple tools set up on your machine. I can help you install like a VS Code and get a simple application running on your server very easily. I can give you my code to do it, and all you'll have to do is go into it and define the database where you want it to show up in with your username and password. Don't use your actual password, use a test password, of course, for security purposes. And you'll be able to push and pull data between two Odoo environments, in this case, via API, and showcase to your customers, the extent, as far as like what is possible in Odoo through an integration. So hopefully this helps. If you have any other questions, let me know. Thanks so much, guys.